Okay, why the people here are working on the video? I have a question to the audience. Do you know all those people here? No? No. So,
Fantastic.
1 minute introduction, every single one of you.
Okay. My name is Simone Bordet. I work on the Jetty project. It's a web server and server container. It's a very old open source project dating back to 1995. I'm here because we recently went through a security audit organized by the Eclipse Foundation, which was a very interesting experience. So I'm here to report about that.
Very good. I'm Scott Fryer. I work
with the open source technology
The video is playing.
a chance to perform a security audit for Eclipse J2, along with a few other projects from the Eclipse Foundation. I guess that some of the representatives of those projects are in the panel.
We don't hear.
I'd really like to be at EclipseCon or OCX, but it was impossible for me to attend. From my rather limited experience on open source and free software, I'd say that auditing the project was a very rare opportunity that we had to embrace and take advantage of. It's the first time I see an upstream project undergo this kind of audit that is much more usual in enterprise software development, or at least in productized open source projects. Overall, I think that the experience went really well, and only a few issues were uncovered despite the thorough jobs that the Trail of Bits team did. The process was smooth and was mostly covered asynchronously. However, a few meetings were needed, but everyone involved did their best to accommodate the different time zones and schedules. So in the end, it was not a problem. From what I recall, the process consisted of two clearly defined stages, the threat model analysis and the security review. One of the things that surprised me the most from the threat model analysis is that during this phase, the audit team did a great job identifying the components and data flows of our applications. I mean, this should be an easy or standard analysis for a user-facing application, but JCube is a very complex and flexible developer tool that can be integrated with applications in multiple ways. There are Gradle plugins, Maven plugins, a standalone library, and so on. It targets Kubernetes, OpenShift, it can create container images, Helm packages, and many more artifacts. And despite this complexity, this initial threat model analysis correctly identified the threat actors and scenarios that were later used during the security review. After these phases, only a couple of issues were detected that we managed to promptly fix and release. I'm really glad that we were given this opportunity, and I hope that other projects from the Foundation can benefit from this initiative too. Let's see now how the experience was for the rest of the projects.
That was Mark for JCube, and we will be back to Scott.
So yes, I'm Scott Fryer. I work on the Eclipse Adoption, mostly with Temurin project. And again, we've recently completed a security audit. And yeah, there's a presentation after this with a much deeper dive into our experience and what we learned. Yep.
Hi, this is Sven Joszewski. Working on a couple of projects coming from the IoT domain, also joining into the SDV or software-defined vehicle domain. And I made it to this panel because we had the pleasure to conduct the security audit with the project called Eclipse Coxer.
Hi, I'm Michael Istria. I'm here representing Eclipse Platform and more specifically the Equinox P2 installer it's using, which went through a security audit recently because of new features we've added to it.
Thank you, everyone. As you can see, we have representatives for very different projects using very different technologies, and that was the reason and the goal of the audits, to do audits all along the Eclipse Foundation stack to see what we can learn from them. And we are going to share those experiences right now. My first question to all of you would be, what were your expectations when we asked if your project wants to get through a security audit? We can start maybe, yes, Simona?
Yeah. So the expectations were, I have to be honest, really low, like super low. The reason is that the Jetty is fundamentally a web server, but it has like a number of complexities that if you're not into writing a web server, they are, wouldn't say extremely difficult to grasp, but you know, they're pretty peculiar. and so the idea that someone from outside with perhaps zero experience on how to write a performant web server would be able to look into our code and find things that would be wrong, or yeah, that was really low. And the expectation, I mean, and we've been through security audits for like now 20 plus years, so we know that we are pretty secure in many places. However, I have to say that the final experience was the exact opposite. I was stunned by the level of knowledge that these security company went through, and overall the experience was great. I would totally recommend the thing. So, kudos.
Scott?
Yeah, I guess I went in without any expectations or even really knowing what to expect. The Temurin JDK is a downstream build of OpenJDK, so we have literally no control over the source code as far as it is source code. We inherit that, we don't patch it, we don't modify it. So we were auditing all of our tools, all of our code that sits around that allows us to build and distribute. It's a big code base, it's a wide variety of things. So I'm fairly new to the project, only 2.5 years, so it was a good opportunity for me to learn about our code base as well as seeing what an audit returned as far as findings. That's me.
Eric?
In our case, we're, first of all, I have to say, quite happy when we were approached, because it always helps a lot if you have some set of fresh eyes looking onto your project, and maybe also questioning or asking about the concepts and the ideas that you have in there. So that's what we were quite happy about. And maybe that's also was the expectation we had initially, that we have someone to interact and explain, okay, what's going on, and they will ask critical questions. Other than that, I didn't have much of an expectation, more because I was not sure how the process would look like, and maybe also the level of expertise I had, but I can agree to what you just said, that I was also really impressed by the results they had in the end. So overall, it was quite good experience.
And finally, Michael,
Yeah, so
for a little bit of a context, they were the first audit that we did.
okay, I didn't know we were the first. And the thing is that I've never gone through a security audit before that. I have no security knowledge. So when we were told that the change we've made will go through a security audit, it was really welcome, because we needed some security expertise to validate the change. It's about signing artifacts and so on, so authenticity of artifacts. But I was to be honest, a bit anxious, because as a non-security expert, I've done what I've been told is good and so on, but I did it mostly by myself, and I was afraid that the security audit would totally crush my solution, telling me that I was very bad at it and so on. And it went much better than I expected, and we'll probably go into details, but I think the security audit really helped you validate fully the solution with a more formal way of ensuring it was actually good than just code that is there and happens to work. So the expectations were good, with some fear, I would say.
Allow me to add one point which maybe also matches to what you just said, because one thing I was afraid about is, in case of Cuxa, it's an abstraction layer which is part of an overall larger system. And I was a bit curious how you can actually evaluate just a small building block of an overall system in terms of security, because, I mean, security, you need more like a holistic view on the whole system that you're building, and not just one piece of, let's say, 10 pieces. But that still worked out quite well, because I actually managed to understand the context around it very fast, and also to see, okay, what are the circumstances under which this issue might become a security threat or even not become a security issue. That's what helped a lot in the end.
Thank you. Mark has spoken a little bit about the phases of the audit, about the threat modeling and the code review. So maybe we are going to teach that a little bit. Who would like to explain how it went through the audit?
Yeah, I'll explain the process. I feel my next talk may cover an awful lot of this.
Amazing.
But it started off with a scoping exercise. So several of us from the project had a a discussion, several discussions with the auditors. We identified the key bits of code, the key repositories that we wanted them to focus their search on, and then they explained the type of reviews and audits they were going to perform across those code bases, and then they literally went away for several weeks and performed that audit. During that time while they were doing the audit, they would ask questions, they would review documentation, and we'd have a lot of back and forth conversation, which several weeks, and then ultimately we had a interim report stage with all of the findings, where we'd had discussion during the process. Obviously we were working to fix anything identified. That carried on for several weeks after that audit period, and then we finished off with a conclusion, a report, final meetings, and closed it out. And then the project itself published the audit, the fixes we had undertaken, and a response to all of the findings. So it was a very positive process. The results were very, very good. Yep, would recommend. And I go back to this. I did a talk yesterday that your security posture is only as good if you evaluate it. If you do things and never check that the things you're doing are correct, you never know if you're secure or not. I think that's a key part of the whole process. So this is a fundamental step in the security circle.
There is one piece of the process that I'd like to add, is that before going through the review, the audit team asks you to describe the problem and the solution you're suggesting. And for us, we didn't have a clear documentation about the solution we've chosen. It was just discussions here and there, but it was messy. And the fact that some external people wanted to get to have a look, to audit the code, it has forced us to create a proper documentation of what we want to do and how we decided to do it. And this documentation was actually extremely valuable. It's something we probably wouldn't have written without the audit, and it would have been a missing piece for users and even for maintainers. So even the preliminary work before the audit was already profitable for us. Just not the audit itself, but just telling you we'll have an audit already forced us to increase quality.
Interesting. So now, looking at the whole audit process, if you have to choose one single thing that surprised you, what would it be? Simone, was that from you?
Okay, so for me was, so we asked them to review especially the parsing side, so the data that a web server receives over the network. And for the HTTP2 protocol, there is a special algorithm that is specified by an RFC by the IETF. And this algorithm fundamentally is made to compress the HTTP headers that come with the request and go out with the response. So the algorithm is quite complicated. It requires, it has a lot of encoding and decoding inside. And unless you have implemented this algorithm, because you're writing an HTTP server, you're not looking into that. It's an obscure RFC, and so remains that. These guys were able to actually go there, study the RFC, totally understand it, and come back with things that were actually a problem in our implementation. So that was like a wow moment for me. It was like, okay, I didn't know that these guys could go this deep, because it's a very specific and narrow thing that only HTTP2 implementation would have to do. And so if you don't do it, then likely you won't even look at it or even know that it exists. So yeah, I was impressed for that.
I was impressed about that part too. Huh?
Yeah,
When we received all the communication, we reviewed that, and I remember your face when they started describing what they found, and your face was
it's
not like that. Scott, and on your end?
I guess for me, I come from a security background, which is at the level of hyper paranoia, where you assume everything's dreadful and you build up from there. And actually having an auditor to come in and say, even with the number of findings, none of them were really, really severe for us, which was a very pleasant surprise. Things were either even if they were exploitable or there was an issue, they were very, very difficult to exploit. So it validates a lot of the other work going on at the project to ensure we're secure. The Adoptium project, Temerin in particular, has been a very key focus over my time there. Probably why I'm employed there, really, to focus on SSDF and SALSA compliance and ensuring our supply chain is secure. Given how widely distributed our JDK is and used, any major issue found in there could have been a fairly big scope. And again, I go back to my hyper-paranoia security state. You're suddenly front page of the news because you've distributed a vulnerability to 50 million people. So not finding that was the most pleasant surprise.
Yeah, it's maybe not a surprise in general, but what I really liked is that they had very extensive fuzzing or dynamic code analysis going on the project. And in our case, we use gRPC, so we have a server and we also provide a client. So they did fuzzing on both sides, the server and the client. And since the client is mostly generated out of the gRPC and protobuf definitions, it's mostly generated code with some extra steps. And I have to admit I was surprised by the number of fuzzy findings they had in the client, even though it was mostly generated. But this helped a lot to improve some of the things that have been added in the client and also tweaks the API in the sense that the client became more secure, even the generated code there, which was even like an extra step in the whole development chain to also keep an eye on. It was quite interesting.
Yeah, what surprised me was not so much the outcome of the audit, because what we did was not too difficult, but really the fact that after the very few mails explaining how we did it with links to the code and a quick chat with the auditors, there was basically no work to do. I was afraid that it would be like spending a week focused with regular calls and regular meetings and so on, and it was just happening by itself, and you get the result at the end and you say it's done, and they tell you, yeah, it's done, you did well. Okay, great. Cool. And that was a good surprise.
My colleagues are talking about the auditors and the teams. We weren't alone at the Eclipse Foundation with this audit. We were helped by the Alpha Omega program. Then OSTIF helped us selecting the auditor company. And then we took professional security auditor companies to actually do the audits. So there were different companies that were involved depending on the technology, but there was the whole team of people working on every single one of them. So, if you had one recommendation for a project that is thinking about having a security audit, what would you recommend to them? And maybe we'll start from the other end. Michael?
Yeah. I would recommend that if you think about it, it's probably that you need it, and it's not a big effort, so just go for it. Tell that to the foundation. You say, I believe this piece of software can be a threat. Can you do something? And even if you don't know anything about security, the Eclipse Foundation staff does most of the job, and you just have to answer a few technical questions. So it's a cheap, it's not a lot of work for the developer, and the value is actually very high. So just go for it if you have the need for it.
I would underline what you just said. Also to the point of you use the audit to actually figure out how people use the project, and it's a good way, maybe a good preparation to have some kind of documentation set up, or at least think about a concept how you want to document. Because what these people will do, they look with a fresh eye or with a fresh mind to your project and try to evaluate it. So basically they will use the sources that they find, being the source code, but also the documentation. So instead of rewriting the documentation for the audit, it helps a lot to already have something in place before. Nevertheless, I would say another learning was it's almost never too early for such an audit. So I think we were approached twice, and for the first time we said, yeah, we need some work on the code and some other things. But looking at the level and deepness of also the static analysis and the analysis regarding the assumed architecture, it would have also helped to have this a bit earlier in the development stage. So I think that's the two takeaways. Think about some kind of documentation, and also it's not too early to do the audit.
I think I'll underline documentation. It was a good validation exercise for all the documentation we have. It's a very extensive, very wide project. Like, I don't think anybody would have a good picture of all of it, but the audit was also an opportunity to get everybody that's involved in contributing to the project involved in the security discussion, because where people are subject matter experts or areas in particular, like somebody might be an expert in the API, I probably can't review security fixes or security bugs in that. So it gets everybody involved in the security discussion and involved in improving things. And besides the audit itself, which was an audit at a point in time, some of the recommendations that came out have then evolved some of our processes to have ongoing processes, automated checks to ensure that those things aren't reintroduced later. So the ongoing benefit is fairly substantial as well.
Yeah, I would say the same documentation awareness for us as well. And then one thing that I would recommend, well, I think if you are, like in our case, for a web server, it's probably do this periodically, because while you may be aware of things, you may not be aware of the latest exploits and everything. So having experts that come back every, I don't know, regularly, maybe every couple of years. I mean, for us, the process took like probably 2-3 months. So, maybe once a year is going to be too often, but, once a year, once every couple of years would be a good reminder that, there's something to look at. And if it comes out that there's nothing to do, well, that's a great outcome. So. I have to turn it on, I think. Other cases.
We'll show you later. Oh, here we are. All the results of the audits are now published. So I linked to blog posts from the Eclipse Foundation for all of them, and they contain links to the actual documents. For most of the projects, there were also blog posts from projects themselves about their experience. But you can see that the font is already pretty small when I just put all those links. But you can find all those blog posts. And I would like to allow a question from the audience. I have more, but I would like to allow a question from the audience. So, who has a question to our panelists? They do not have a question right now, so I will go with my backup list that they do not know. That's the funny part. So after the audit itself, I will explain to the audience. During the audit, we have taught the auditing company to concentrate on certain parts of their applications or libraries, because it was time boxed. There was a given time the auditors will spend. So, having that experience, are you able right now to identify places in your project that you would put on stage in another audit?
Like other parts that were not audited before?
Yeah. You do not have to tell us, but...
No, I think we covered the... wouldn't say everything because of course I'm exposing myself, but the most dangerous part were covered. So for now, not for now. I don't have a particular place. I would suggest to go for another audit. I would suggest to go to the same places and verify that there are all the things that were done in the past were still good and that we didn't introduce anything new by mistake. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
I think very, very, very similar. We identified everything that was critical to take us from source code to delivered distribution, and that being the supply chain is the most fundamental part. We didn't omit anything that is involved in that end-to-end process. So our Jenkins pipeline code, our build scripts, our infrastructure, build scripts, all of that was covered in the audit, and I think I would go back and go through the same piece again if we do it again.
Thank you. And for Cuxa, you are a rapidly evolving project, so is the answer different in your case?
I think it's a bit hard to explain what we might change, because then you need to explain the whole project. I tried anyway, because we basically have a server to which multiple systems in a car can send their data. Like we call it providers, so you can get the data from Ken, for instance, or maybe from a recording. And in the audit, we only had the client that is interacting with the server and is then used in all these providers. And maybe for the next audit, we would also include one or two of these providers, which are more than an actual implementation of the concept, which has already been audited. Another thing is actually also very heavily influenced by the findings. We decided to shape the API of this data broker, or the Cuxa API, quite heavily. And I think it would be also interesting to have the auditors get another look at this API. Because what we changed especially is in the old API, we had some SQL-like-ish interface to do some queries. And we decided together with the auditors that this might be too large of an attack surface, so we just removed the whole interface. And so that would be interesting what they think about this in another round.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, so for the P2 installer, the only threat we are aware of is that people can try to install wrong data in your IDE, and then you get whatever issue with it. So since it's the only threat, we don't have ideas of further audits we will do now on the code. However, it's now clear that if we were to add a new type of signature or a new process to verify the authenticity of artifacts, whenever we will change that, we will probably go for and ask for an audit again.
That seems reasonable, right? Do we have... Yeah, we do have a question from the audience then. Yeah, and we have the person with the microphone running.
Better, awesome.
Yeah, hi. One question. So I know these type of security audits are pretty expensive. So I guess for Eclipse projects, the Eclipse Foundation was sort of like financing that. But assuming that there are projects that are not at the Eclipse Foundation, what were their average costs of such a security audit?
I'm not sure if I'm authorized to say how much it was, so...
Okay.
We can chat with the team maybe to figure out if we can say. But the typical market rates of such audits, it of course depends on time. From public sources, you can find between 20 and 50,000 per audit. That's what you can find in public sources.
Thanks.
And maybe in addition, as Marta said in the very beginning, this audits were also facilitated by another organization, and I think there was also this Alpha Omega project, and there's like a really nice GitHub repository of other reports from that organization, or also from the Open Source Technology Improvement Fund, which was also part of the equation, and they see a lot of other projects not coming from the Eclipse Foundation, like out of my head there was curl, for instance, or LPM. So there are also funding options for other open source projects outside the Eclipse Foundation, even though obviously we now talk mostly about Eclipse here.
Yeah, I would also add that I would recommend people to get through the audit that we have done, because you can find pointers to vulnerabilities that you may have yourself.
Yeah.
We went through more than people who are there, and there were some repeats. There were some similar vulnerabilities in different projects. So then I would heavily suggest projects that have similar code to, and you are using similar technologies, to have a look at the result, to think, can we have that kind of an issue on our end? That could be a nice outcome.
Even in addition to that, some of the code analysis tools used are open source and available. So again, you could look at the reports. They quite clearly specify what tools and practices we used and implement them yourselves without the thing. At least you're then getting a level of security audit you're doing yourself.
Yeah, it's exactly what we've done for P2. The solution we've chosen, we've kind of copied it from RPM or other package manager, which has the exact same issue. And those ones went through audits. So you say, okay, what they did was validated. We will copy it. And when we go through audit, it's as good as what they did. So learning from similar projects really helps already picking the right security solution.
We are getting out of time. Won't be able to take another question. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for all of you and all the work that you have done during the whole process and in other places. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta.
Thank you. Thanks.